Hi, I'm Oliver, and this is Deep Cuts, a channel dedicated to music for lovers of music. So this is my April 2018 album review roundup. There's a couple of good albums this month, a couple of not so good albums, some real standouts. Obviously I've missed out a ton of records this month because as ever I cannot get around to reviewing all of them. So in the comment section, if you want to discuss some of the stuff I haven't talked about, I'll be in the comment section to do that. Let's just jump straight into it. Janelle Monae, Dirty Computer. Rejoice, because Janelle Monae is back and absolutely killing it with another fantastic record. For those of you that haven't listened to Monáe yet, first off, why not? You need to go and listen to the ArchAndroid, her 2010 record, which will make you realise she's one of the best and most important artists of this generation. She's a singer, songwriter, producer, actor, everything she does, she just throws herself into it. And although I might like some of her projects slightly less than others, I can say that she always seems to put a great amount of care and attention to detail in everything she does. And she always has something to say, and these are things that we need to cherish. Her previous release, the second LP, The Electric Lady, I found less compelling than the masterful digital R&B funk concept record, The ArchAndroid, which was her debut record released in 2010. For me, that's kind of the pinnacle of her artistic talents to date. And now she's back with her third album, Dirty Computer, a record which calls for racial equality, celebrates pansexuality, queer identity, all through her very compelling palette of digital funk, provocative R&B, and shiny pop. It's the kind of record that I find myself obsessing over a single track, listening to over and over again and reveling in the stellar production, Monáe's flawless vocals, and then you get to the next track and you feel exactly the same about the next one, to the point where the whole record is kind of overwhelming in a way. That was my experience on a first listen, and it's been my experience on subsequent listens to this record. This is my experience of Dirty Computer, an album which is masterfully arranged, produced and birthed into the world, both conceptually and musically. The dazzling melodies of Crazy Classic Life and its decisive bass lines, trap-indebted drum sequences, the stellar trap-indebted Django Jane, the gorgeous soaring pop of Pink, which features Grimes, the track Make Me Feel, which is clearly a love letter to Prince's Kiss, someone who actually worked on the album with Janelle prior to his death. Aside from the instrumentation, Janelle's lyricism is clever, concise, and liberating. There's an honesty to everything she's saying. She's saying this because she wants to say it and she's got something to say. What I'm trying to say is this isn't a marketing ploy. On Take a Bite, Janelle talks about the heteronormativity of society, and she uses the kind of vocabulary that evokes her first EP, Metropolis, where she talks about the digital pervading our lives. Your code is programmed not to love me, but you can't pretend. Oh, what a surprise. Maybe it's lust, maybe it's love, maybe it never ends. On the triumphant finale, Americans, Janelle is criticising the homophobia, sexism and racism of contemporary America, but she does so with such a barnstorming, catchy track that it actually makes the sentiment feel even more biting in some way, in that juxtaposition of feelings. And this is just such a good record. I think Janelle Monae has really achieved something brilliant here, on the same sort of level as the ArchAndroid. One of my records of the month, for sure. Manic Street Preachers, Resistance is Futile. Good old dependable Manics. Manic Street Preachers are a Welsh rock band who have been going since 1986 and in my eyes have released two very, very good records. So you have 1994's The Holy Bible, which in my eyes is a complete masterpiece, and you also have 2009's Journal for Plague Lovers, which is a dark and intimate record that I've listened to so many times since it was first released. They are a band with a rich history, but there's something strange about the Manic's output to me, is that they haven't ever put out a bad record. They've put out records I've liked slightly less, but they've released 13 records since 1986, and none of them are bad. None of them are poor. They've always got, Sean Moore, James Dean Bradfield and Nicky Wire. They just know how to craft an enduring selection of songs. And that's their lasting power as a band, I think. When they really strike out, though, they have the ability to create astonishing pieces of work, a la Holy Bible, Journal for Plague Lovers, which I do implore you to check out if you've never listened to those albums before. If you aren't aware of the history of the Manics, Richie Edwards was the original lyricist and guitarist for the band, and he had an imposing lyrical prowess. You only need to listen to something like The Holy Bible to realise that the really difficult, depressing, dark topics that he tackled with his lyricism and managed to portray in such a vivid and in sometimes uncomfortable way. Edwards went missing in 1995 though and was never found, so the band continued as a three-piece. I've always felt that without Edwards' lyrics, although I enjoy the Manic's work, it lacks the formidable bite that it had with his lyricism. Tellingly, 2009's Journal for Plague Lovers, for example, was all the lyricism was constructed from a notebook that Edwards had left behind. He'd gifted to Nicky Wire a couple of weeks before he went missing. So James Dean Bradfield and Nicky Wire wrote these tracks around his lyricism. And I think, it really shows, because there's just something about his lyrical prowess that shines through the stuff that he wrote. And again, their 13th record, Resistance is Futile, is merely good. It's an enjoyable record. It has some good tracks. It has some less memorable tracks, but it just doesn't stand out in the way that their work did with Richie Edwards' lyricism. And that might seem like a bit of a harsh criticism in some ways, because what are they going to do? You know, the guy disappeared, sadly, and was never found. His body was never found or anything. But that's just the way I feel when I approach the Manic Street Preachers. It just doesn't jump out to me as much, which is strange, because the music's being written by the same people. You know, Edwards mainly did lyrics, and James Dean Bradfield and Nicky Wire did the music. But I don't know, there's something about when I listen to these records from the Manics and the last few records, ever since Journal for Plague Lovers, and they've gone back to Nicky Wire writing lyrics, it just doesn't have the same impact for me. I don't think this album will change anybody's life. I don't think it will gain the band any new fans particularly. Sequels of Forgotten Wars is punchy and is accented with these pinging synth sounds. International Blue has this cheesy string backing which works so well together with the almost irritatingly catchy pre-chorus. Broken Algorithms blasts along at a breakneck pace, and James Dean Bradfield's signature scratchy tone defining things. In the end, this album has some great rock tracks on it. The Manics prove once again that they know how to write a catchy song. But as a personal preference, this still just doesn't capture me the way that Journal for Plague Lovers does, the Holy Bible does, and it ends up just being a merely enjoyable record. I'd love to know your thoughts. If there's Manic fans watching this, I'd love to know what you guys think of this album. What do you think about the contrast between the work with Richie Edwards as a lyricist and the work where Nicky Wire's doing most of the lyrics? Do you see a massive difference in quality, or is that just a massive bias on my part? Let's chat about it. Sleep, The Sciences. Holy shit, we got a new Sleep album, and it legitimately blew my socks off. For those unlucky enough to have never listened to Sleep before, they're a Californian doom metal, stoner metal band that have pretty much never put a foot wrong. Their first release, Volume 1, was pretty good, but 1993's Sleep's Holy Mountain and 2003's Dope Smoker are masterpieces, to the point that I did not include them in my 5 albums to get you into doom metal video, and subsequently got hate mail as a result. Fair enough, you may have had a point. The Sciences was a surprise release from Al Cisneros, Jason Roeder and Matt Pike, fittingly dropping it on 420 for a band that so religiously worships the god of weed, like many stoner bands do, but you know, Sleep are really up there with that. First album in 2 decades, released on Jack White's Third Man Records label, they immediately swat away the suggestion that they may have softened since Dope Smoker by releasing an absolute slab of heaviness. We have glacial drums, we have the kind of hypnotic riff riding that makes you feel as if you're on another planet, even if you haven't smoked. This is the delight of Sleep. On The Sciences, they prove that over a 53-minute running time, you can essentially ride the same riff and it never gets boring for the listener, providing you are all locked in as a band. And this is exactly how Sleep operate. They are such a finely tuned trio. This trio seems to be cerebrally connected on The Sciences. Take the slow riffage of Antarctican's Thord, for example, where it really perfectly balances the lethargic sludge but also dynamic performance of this music. Oh, and also, at the 10-minute mark, Matt Pike's solo, bellissimo. Each time I've listened to this record on headphones, I've been noticing that I've been turning it up slightly each time, because this record operates perfectly when it's loud. It's supposed to rattle your brain a little bit, and it makes every moment of this record seems so much more monolithic. So if you're going to listen to this record, please make sure you have it on loud. You know, I'm not condoning you damaging your ears, you understand. Maybe a little bit. The psychedelic-esque wig out of the final track, The Botanist, is actually one of my favourites here, gradually burning out like the big old spliff that likely inspired it. What else can I say? Sleep are awesome, as is this record. Rival consoles, Persona. So now I sit here before you talking about a record which was inspired by one of my absolute favourite films, which also happens to be a profound, alluring piece of work, one of the best records I've listened to this year. Rival Consoles is the moniker of Ryan Lee West, a musician from Leicester, which is a town in the north of England. I've been following his output as Rival Consoles to date, and although he's clearly a talented musician, I've found I've never really connected with any of his releases to the point where I've not really returned to them a great deal. I felt as if even though there's a competency in his work, it lacked an intimacy a human connection. Persona changed all of that for me. Inspired by the masterpiece psychoanalytic drama Persona, directed by the great director Ingmar Bergman, this record takes on that concept and fleshes it out with a musical palette. So he uses analog synthesizers and effects pedals to construct these gorgeous, expansive, dance-inflected landscapes. In the press release, West tellingly wrote this: like Legowelt once said, a synthesizer is like a translator for unknown emotions, which I think sums up what I'm trying to do. I think all these emotions we have make up our persona. So in a way, by finding new ones, you alter or expand your persona. And that is what I want my music to try to do. A synthesizer is like a translator for unknown emotions. I like the phrase, although I would say that the emotions that you feel with different kinds of music aren't really unknown. They're just difficult to express in words, which I think is perhaps what that phrase is trying to say. But I do think in many ways that does hold true. On this record, there are tracks that are defined by a 4-to-the-floor beat, yet they're never tethered emotionally, which I think is really important. And elsewhere, West creates these cinematic moments full of depth and emotion, encouraging the listener, which is you, hopefully, and me, to experience something quite profound. The title track is a great example of a dance beat not standing in the way of an exploratory musical approach. You know, the beat's always there, but West builds the track through these discursive shifts, creating these stunning pockets of groove and atmosphere, and just as you connect it to them and you float away, the track changes slightly, but it never jars. It's this constantly shifting entity. Untravel is beatless, but it still rides this 16th note rhythm in the melodic sections, and it builds to this. It's just such a heartbreaking track. I was pretty moved the first time I listened to this, and subsequently I've listened to it a lot. I think it's a really beautiful track, rivaling the kind of emotion you'll feel on John Hopkins' new record Singularity, which I'll be talking about at the end of May. It's that level of emotional depth, and I'm a massive John Hopkins fan, so that's a big compliment to Rival Console's work. I just think it's a beautiful track, and if you don't have emotional connection to that, have you really got a heart beating in your chest? I don't know. Rival Consoles finally proved itself to have a heart and soul, and I think Persona is a fantastic album, and I'll be listening to it for a very long time, and I implore you to do so as well, because I do think it's just a really beautiful piece of work that you will hopefully have a profound experience with. Let's talk about it in the comment section. Flatbush Zombies, Vacation in Hell. East Coast American hip-hop group Flatbush Zombies released their second LP, Vacation in Hell, in April, which is a marginal step up in quality from their debut LP, 3001: A Laced Odyssey. However, this reviewer personally sees this record as an uncoordinated, unfocused mess. Flatbush Zombies are a trio made up of Michi Darko, The Architect, and Zombie Juice, and I think the thing that really limits this group for me is that they seem to lack an identity in a genre that seems at times so overly saturated as hip-hop does. You know, this record, specifically Vacation in Hell, just feels like another collection of lowest common denominator tracks which don't really have a focus, they don't really seem to have a purpose, they're all just squeezed onto this record with little thought. This thing's an hour and a quarter long. You really have to create something great to hold my focus for over an hour when it comes to the record format, and this absolutely has none of that power. I understand this new prevalence of some hip-hop artists utilizing streaming services to their advantage by creating these achingly long projects to increase streaming revenue and also potential chart positions. You know, we've got the 3-disc Ray Shremmerd album, which I cannot wait to sink my teeth into. Vacation in Hell chops all over the place stylistically, which doesn't have to be a bad thing. Take any of the Saturation records by Brockhampton last year, and they all did that, and they all achieved something great. I never found myself bored listening to those records. However, with Vacation in Hell, the main issue is that none of these styles are approached in a particularly engaging way. The trappy horrorcore of opening track Hello is, yeah, by the numbers, heard it a million times before. The piano-led ballad-esque Leather Symphony with ASAP 12 featuring, again, I feel like I heard that track a million times before. Elliot, who is also known as The Architect, produced this record alongside featuring on it as well. And he's a competent producer. Everything sounds crisp, I suppose, but it just lacks a magic touch. It's serviceable, but almost entirely unmemorable. Moreover, I'm not really feeling the skills of any of these rappers in Flatbush Zombies. I just don't feel it. For me, if you're gonna be a rapper, you have to have something that captures me or captures the audience with your flow. You have to have either interesting rhythmic flows and structures or dense subject matter, or you want to make your audience laugh. Anything. And for me, there's nothing I've heard from Vacation in Hell or any subsequent Flatbush Zombies releases that has really made me feel that way about any of these three rappers. And as such, that again makes the record an exhaustingly dull listen. There are far better projects to check out than this month. I did not like this album, if you couldn't tell. Grouper, Grid of Points. American musician Liz Harris, under her moniker Grouper, has released a follow-up to her 2014 piano and vocal-led ambient record Ruins, which is a beautiful record if you haven't listened to it. But I guess the most curious thing about this new release is its length. Grid of Points is only 21 minutes long, which, let's be honest, is EP length. But in that short space of time, Harris still manages to evoke those sparse, haunted and intimate atmospheres that make her work so damn special. If you've never heard Grouper before, chances are that it will be some of the most fragile music you'll ever likely listen to. And it's the testament to Liz's songwriting abilities that she can hold the listener's attention for so long with such a minute sonic palette. It's all about that piano and her vocals and the reverberations of space that are created with those two different sounds. The track Driving hit me squarely in the gut on the first listen, and Liz is playing and using silence as an instrument just as much as the piano and the vocals. Again, that's what's so spectral, so that spectral quality of her music. That's where it comes from. It's the use of silence, and her piano chords ring out into the silence and they seem to gently illuminate the darkness that surrounds her. Final track, Breathing, disintegrates into a billowing field recording, which leaves me wondering what Liz is going to do with her music next. Is it going to be this similar palette of vocals and piano and reverb, or is it going to be something altogether more experimental? I'm interested to find out. If you've never listened to Grouper before, you're in for a treat. You should listen to Grid of Points. This is a great release and a nice introduction because it's only 21, 22 minutes long. You should also listen to Ruins, and you should also listen to Dragging a Dead Deer Up a Hill because she's magic. The NorthaZe, Lunar, Duplex. Some of you might already be aware of the NorthaZe if one, you listen to my podcast with Swish and Coasty Tides of the NorthaZe. That's a really enjoyable podcast. You should go and listen to that if you haven't already. Or two, you joined my listening party on the Deep Cuts Discord of their project Mellow Thrills, which was released in 2016, which I really like. I guess the other possibility is that you're just a big fan of underground British hip-hop from the north of England. And if that's you, good on you. For everyone else, the NorthaZe are a hip-hop duo from the north of England from a city called Leeds, made up of Swish and Coasty Tides, and they've been creating some damn interesting music over the past 2 years. I really wanted to talk about them today because aside from being the kind of act that approaches their music in an engaging and an original way, Lunar Duplex, which is their new project, synthesizes everything that makes them so great. Their production style is tightly focused, and it's something that they retain focus on throughout all of their music, which is, again, it's a lovely synergy in their music. When you're listening to a NorthaZe track, you know it's a NorthaZe track. That's how I feel every time I've listened to their projects over the past few years. That's a very positive thing to say there. There's always these layers of wistful synth samples and laid-back beats, and it's a mixture of feeling as if you're deeply submerged or you're floating somewhere up in the clouds. These are the feelings that their music evokes, certainly that their production evokes, and they do that so well. On top of that, their thick Leeds accents accentuate the dexterous and witty flows that are embedded in every track I've ever listened to of theirs. They have this obsession with astral planes and lunar cycles in their lyricism, which again brings it back round to that wistful production that they use, that feeling of being submerged or floating off into the ether somewhere. But alongside that, they also have these cultural pop references in a lot of their work, which grounds them as artists in the here and now. Lunar Duplex is available to listen to on SoundCloud, which I will provide a link for in the description below, and they have provided individual track listings in it, but as you know, when you listen to a SoundCloud project, often it is one long track, which is what they've done here. So it's 31-minute track, and I think it works really well as this singular, expansive, smoky piece of music. The lethargy of a track like Headshot, replicated again on a track like Insomnia, is so chilled and it's very laid back, but it never loses that slight edge of paranoia which is created by the juxtaposition of their dexterous, sometimes quite quick flows, and then these slow, dreamy instrumentals. Please listen to these guys, listen to Lunar Duplex. I've been saying this about the NorthaZe for a while now, but they deserve to be listened to by a lot more people than they are being listened to, so please check them out and support them. Sting and Shaggy, 44876. I can still remember the first time that I heard that this was a project, that this was actually happening, and I still can't quite believe it. In what world are we living in? In what world is Sting and Shaggy, the guy that did It Wasn't Me in the shower, whatever that is. In what world do we live in that those two collaborate on a putrid, shiny, big budget dance hall reggae pop record? In what world? It makes sense now. This must be the darkest timeline. To be fair to it, as dull and forgettable as the opening title track 44876 is, it's not offensive, just utterly unmemorable. Dancehall pop is, pretty listenable for the most part, and even though I'm not in any way at all saying go and listen to this, because I really wouldn't recommend it at all, it didn't want to make me eat a bullet like Jack White's record last month did. I am still only talking about the first track, bear in mind. But then second track, Morning is Coming, sets in with its reggae sway, horns, Sting's feigned Caribbean accent, the sickly sweet nursery rhyme-like lyrics. Spare me. A lot of this record just sounds like a horrendously ill-advised mashup of a number of different ideas. Some of it sounds like shiny big budget dancehall tracks. Other stuff sounds like Sting solo work circa 2001 around his Brand New Day tour. Those things just do not go together. If I were to come up with a rock solid example of a pastiche, it would likely be this album. Not a good pastiche, a shit pastiche. Like, just fuck off, Sting. Why do you think you can do every single style? What gives you that arrogance that you think you can do that? It's just flipping, it's awful. And why work with Shaggy? You could work with a lot of different people with the kind of clout you have as an artist. I thought we'd all forgotten about Shaggy since 2001 when he released Hot Shot, which was the first record I ever bought with my money. Keep that quiet, all you people that are watching. Just bizarre, so bizarre, not really sure why this was released, not really sure why I wasted my time reviewing it either, but I did it, so there we go. So that was my April 2018 album review roundup. I hope you've enjoyed watching. Let me know in the comment section the albums that you've listened to and enjoyed this month, so we'll have a discussion about that. There's so many high-profile releases coming out in May. It's going to be a bit of a stacked month. We've got things like John Hopkins' Singularity, we've got Arctic Monkeys. June's going to be crazy. I think I'm going to have to do a separate roundup just for Yeezy season because he's involved in 4 or 5 records, so I might just do a separate video for that altogether. So we've got that coming in the next couple of months. Please join me on the Deep Cuts Discord for a listening party of Rival Consoles Persona Tuesday at 10 PM BST, not GMT, BST now. I think that'll be a fun one to do a listening party for. Yeah, thanks for watching. I'll be back next week with a discussion video on elitism in music. Thanks a lot. See you then.